Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be taking a look at the Georgia State Panthers, who finished 7-6 last season. They capped off their season with a win over Utah State in the famous Idaho Potato Bowl. They wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on April 12th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is a Georgia State alumni. He is a former walk-on. He covers Georgia State for 24/7 Sports. He is Ben Moore. Ben can be found at Ben Moore 24/7 on X. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Appreciate the time today.
We are glad to have you on. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what led you to be interested in sports journalism and then end up here covering Georgia State Panthers?
Yeah, it's a great question. Went to high school in Metro Atlanta, just south of the city, and always enjoyed writing. Wanted to write, enjoyed writing. I was an old school newspaper guy. Read the newspaper basically every day, and getting to see folks get close to the games and go from there was always appealing to me. Atlanta obviously being a huge market, I think number 6 now in the country, but was certainly big, had pro sports, college sports, wanted to do that as well. Stayed home for school, and journalism was always the priority there. Enjoyed writing and enjoying being around it, and been fortunate to cover the Panthers program since practice, number 1 in 2009, and it's one of the newer college football programs, especially in this market in the Southeast, and some others have popped FBS since from Georgia, but been a lot of fun. It's been a bumpy ride. It's been an interesting learning experience for sure, and I'm just really fortunate to have great folks that have been along with me on the journey, and have been able to accumulate a lot of great staff and a lot of folks that have come and wrote for me and my site, and just fortunate, obviously, to talk to folks like you and brag on the site and talk Panthers football, which is something I can do every day.
Love to hear it. Yeah, we want to bring all the eyes to the G5 that we can, because, with the playoff expanding to now get in a G5 member is huge. And now, all these other G5 teams that only really cared about their team, well, now they're kind of curious about everybody else's team. And this is a good way to get to know everybody. So the Panthers here had a crazy offseason. We got head coach Sean Elliott resigns during spring practice, time to become the tight ends coach there at South Carolina. What was it like around campus, around town when all that went down?
Yeah, truthfully, it wasn't shocking. And I know most folks, certainly heard about that now. His family never moved. The 7 years he was here, Georgia State, never moved from Columbia, South Carolina, from his previous time coaching with the Gamecocks and Coach Steve Spurrier, and then Will Muschamp after that. So he was very frequently back in Columbia, going from Atlanta to Columbia to go be with his family every opportunity he was able to do. And, that I know put a strain on him personally. Family, I'm, family first guy. I could not, imagine working in a completely different city, hours away from my wife and kids either. So when the opportunity presented itself to join Shane Beamer's staff, he jumped on that and, exited the program. So once we had kind of heard whispers that he was exiting and exiting pretty quickly, there were several names that popped up that made a lot of sense. And one of those obviously was Del McGee. He had his son just committed and signed there as well, as native Georgian from Columbus, down south western part of the state, and has been on national championship staff there at the University of Georgia for 9 years. So he made a ton of sense. And while it was a little bit different, he certainly, Coach Elliott wasn't the first Sun Belt head coach to leave either. We saw Kane Womack leave, go join the Alabama staff, leave South Alabama. We've seen several around the G5 ranks as well go to NFL vacancies or other college vacancies. I think we were talking a little bit off air just about the shift of kind of the portal and NIL being teamed with, their amount of work, not only recruiting, but, recruiting and retaining their own players. I think all that weighed on Sean, and, Del has leaned into that in a big way, and it's certainly paid off so far in the 5 months he's been on campus in downtown Atlanta.
Well, we talk about Coach McGee coming in, and I was going to ask, what does he bring for the Panthers on and off the field? You kind of touched on it there in the off the field, the NIL, the recruiting aspect. Well, what is he going to bring for this Panthers team on the offensive side of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, he's a running backs coach. This team's going to run the football. He's going to have super talented running backs. He loaded up the running back room as well this offseason. And the Panthers were known to run the football. And Sean Elliott's tenure was about 65 to 35 run versus pass in his tenure. I can see something similar to that, but I think Dell wants a more pro-style quarterback and pro-style pro-style offense there under Jim Chaney and Ryan Williams. But you're going to see explosive players on every single layer, significant more size on the offensive and defensive line. That's something that I think he understands coming from an SEC and a power team, that he knows the value of that, knowing to move folks around. And I think this team is just going to have speed all over the place. That's the one thing that I won't say Georgia State was lacking, but, there was other programs in the Sun Belt and specifically in the Group of Five that may have had more speed pound for pound at certain positions. But I think that there's certain specific traits that Del McGee is looking for. He wants his guys to run track. He wants guys to move in space at a high rate of speed on both sides of the ball. And I think you're going to see that specifically on the offense. He's going to want some explosive playmakers, a lot of bigger playmakers. Again, as I mentioned, strong, powerful, quick running backs. Really tall wide receivers, went and got multiple guys who are 6'2", 6'3", 6'4" on the outside, just to really, really put the pressure on opposing defenses. So, interested to see how that all plays out and who plays. Basically, I was told pretty early every single position on this roster is open for grabs with the new coach, new coaching staff, and the folks that embrace that competition will see the field there week 1 against Georgia Tech.
And you mentioned Jim Chaney. Coach McGee appoints him as the new offensive coordinator, who's previously an analyst at Texas A&M, but has plenty of OC background. Can you describe the type of offense that Coach Chaney brings with him and plans to run there at Georgia State? I know you mentioned they're going to run the ball, but is there any more that you can elaborate there?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be more pro-style. He brought in 2 pro-style quarterbacks. Zach Gibson came over from Georgia Tech. Kristen Veyer came over, from Pitt. Guys that can want to throw the ball downfield, want to be able to hit the intermediate routes, utilizing multiple tight end sets. This offense was super run heavy. A dual threat quarterback, running backs, running a lot of inside power, zone, a lot of option plays and things like that. I believe you're going to see a little bit more of a change away from that as well. But the staff's also brought in guys that were quarterbacks elsewhere. Brought in 2 guys from Middle Tennessee State and Kyle Lowe and DJ Riles, who can kind of be offensive weapons, if you will. So guys that may be, running backs, wide receivers, just shifting to really get the best 11 players and most explosive players on offense. But you're going to see, 2 tight end sets. You're going to see 3 wide receivers, as much of a pro-style offense as you can possibly get. And this team wants to get out and, throw the ball and really apply pressure on all 3 levels. And I think, they certainly are building to do that once practice starts next week.
And you touched on that quarterback room. So Darren Granger graduated, and then we were talking a little bit before, and McKay Lee Colacerdo, he retired from football, and they brought in those quarterbacks in the portal that you mentioned. Zach Gibson. The only thing that's different, I guess, about Zach Gibson versus Christian Veyer and the Middle Tennessee guys in Lowe and Riles is that Gibson was there in January while the other guys come in after spring. What should we make of this room heading into the fall? And do you think Gibson has a leg up because he was there in January, or what do you kind of see happening here week 1 against Georgia Tech?
Yeah, Zach Gibson is an experienced guy. He's got 26 career starts, started his career at Akron, started 2 seasons there, went to Georgia Tech, and kind of in the midst of just a awful situation there, Jeff Collins, and it's been written about and documented pretty well, just how disorganized Georgia Tech was under that era. I don't necessarily throw all his stats out there, but I think he's a little bit more athletic than he was given credit for. But that program was certainly dysfunctional. Coming over in January certainly helps. He's able to kind of be the old guy in the room, if you will, been around college football for 5 years, understands play calls, and really looking to kind of get that opportunity. Vayer had a opportunity to play last year with Pitt, 7 games. Pitt's offense was dreadful. Just the planning of it was just not good. But he has pretty good arm. He's a guy that can push the pocket and really move around a little bit. Gibbs has probably got a little bit athleticism wise, but Vayer hadn't played a ton. I think that's where kind of Gibson gets that little bit of a nose right now. And even guys, I think the younger guys basically come in, probably be fighting for backup reps and opportunity, just to stay off that scout team at that point. So I do think it's a 2-horse race right now between those two, and just seeing what what they can do in fall camp and see who comes out and who's named the starter.
Well, let's move over to that running game. Marcus Carroll's off to Missouri. He takes his 1,350 yards rushing and 13 touchdowns with him. KZ Adams also leaves, but he goes over to South Carolina State. Freddie Brock returns with some game experience for this Panther team. He had 307 yards and 1 touchdown on the ground last year. They bring in a late recruit that from Colorado, Savion Wilkerson. They've got Michelle Dukes from USF and Jordan Ford from Tulsa. And then a guy that a lot of people are intrigued about is CJ Beasley from Coastal Carolina, one of those guys that, I don't know, always kind of a thought that we would see more of and just didn't quite get to see it there at Coastal. We got Savion Wilkerson comes in after the spring, like you mentioned. Ford and Dukes also in after the spring. What can you tell us about this running back room?
Yeah, it's really strong. A lot of experience, a lot of size, a lot of power. You mentioned CJ Beasley knows the Sun Belt extremely well, coming from Coastal Carolina. Guy that was just kind of nicked up several times in his career, really kind of stunted his growth a little bit, but he still played a ton. Jordan Ford's an exciting prospect, as well as Wilkerson, coming from Colorado. Wasn't really used a ton at Colorado, so. The one thing that you look from where Del McGee came from, the University of Georgia, is they were more than happy to rotate 3 or 4 running backs and just really kind of, wear teams down. And I think that's what this staff has done this offseason is just address this need, because it went from, hey, you lose Marcus Carroll, one of the best running backs, in the country to Missouri. And now you can, throw, multiple bodies at the situation and see if guys can step right in and tote the rock. I was told long ago, if a head coach, it was a position coach of a specific unit at a previous camp, and especially is successful, that room should be the strongest. And you've seen it certainly so far. Sean Elliott was offensive line coach at South Carolina. Previous to that, Trent Miles was a wide receiver coach, at Notre Dame and Washington, a couple of their spots that way. So those rooms were always stocked. This running back room is loaded with guys that can tote the football. And but I do like the senior side of things. I mean, you've got Wilkerson, who's a senior, played better parts of 4 years. Beasley's played a ton of the Sun Belt. Ford's definitely a young guy that I like, that has some experience there with Tulsa. So you're going to have some experience, you're going to have some power, you're going to have some speed, and just let the best man win.
So Carroll dominated those rushing attempts in 2023. Do you have a gut feel? I know we haven't been able to see a lot yet with camp starting this next week. Do you have a feeling on who that running back one or that guy who's going to take a first snap can be there in that room?
I think it's honestly going to be open. It's one of the things too. I looked at when Dell was the running back coach at Georgia. You just look at the splits. I mean, you had leading rushers for sure, but I mean, you had guys getting 8, 10, 12 carries a game up and down that roster. So I think that's going to be the plan here as well. Again, I'd give it a little bit of edge to CJ Beasley if he's healthy, but I mean, I think every carry is up for grabs at this point.
All right. Well, the Panthers wide receiver room took a big hit when leading receiver Robert Lewis transferred to Auburn. They also lost Jakari Carter. He was their 3rd leading receiver in 2023. That means 154 targets are up for grabs here in 2024. They brought back Curtis Thompson, Jakias Creedle, and Peter Kikwata. They had 67 targets between the 3 of them in 2023, but the biggest get may have been Talik Williams withdrew from the portal. He had 67 targets just himself last year, and he was their 2nd leading receiver. While they did lose guys to the portal, they brought some guys in. After the spring, they brought in Ted Hurst, and then Yosef Terry from USF. How do you feel about this wide receiver room going into summer, fall camp here?
Yeah, really was. I thought coming, in spring was probably going to be one of the biggest question marks. One of the rooms that I had the biggest question marks, kind of going into the offseason. But as you mentioned, the staff is loaded up. Getting Talik back was huge. Just sheer speed. Really can't coach speed. He's from the same area in the state of Georgia where Del McGee is from. He's from an area called Pine Mountain, Georgia, just outside of Columbus. Those two, I'm sure, have known each other since Talik was in high school, and probably wanted to go play for Del, the University of Georgia. So there's certainly a relationship there. So he jumped out in the portal and then came back basically toward the end of spring practices. Del was able to kind of convince him to come back. Huge get there. You got Ja'Kias Creedle. He's been banged up for the better part of his career. Looks great getting off the bus. It's been one nagging injury after another. If he can stay healthy, guy that came out of UCF, pretty big body, and was a highly ranked recruit. As you mentioned, Kikwada had some backup reps last season, in kind of sparing duty. Kadarius Thompson really had a kind of breakout moment there in the bowl game, with so many guys out, including Lewis. Going ahead and jumping into the portal as he headed to Auburn, became that number one target, and showed out there in Idaho, catching a couple touchdown passes as well. So you have plenty of guys that will have the opportunity to catch the football. You mentioned Ted Hurst as a guy that came up from Division II. Very interesting story there. Kid from Savannah that probably felt like, hey, I was probably under recruited, coming out of high school, heading to a D2 school, and now has an opportunity to be, have a big opportunity splash here in the Sun Belt. So there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of guys that hadn't played a ton at this level, but ultimately guys, even a guy like Peter Tucker, who came from the junior college ranks. I always look at junior college guys. They're coming here for a reason, right? They want to play right away. They want to jump in, make their mark there. But yeah, Del wants some bigger targets, some bigger body guys. And I think, he certainly was able to do that. I think the size across the board has certainly improved in the wide receiver room at Georgia State.
So in this new offense, how do you see those 154 vacated targets that I mentioned earlier being split up in this pro style offense? Spread the wealth. Is there going to be a guy that's targeted more often? Do you think? I mean, we haven't got to see everybody in yet, but do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's wide open. I really do. I think, if I had to give just a nod based on experience, I think Thompson and Talik, certainly Creedle, if he's healthy, or the 1, 2, 3 guys. You always got to look out for the coach's son as well, too. Austin McGee was the state 100 champion in the state of Georgia. He may factor at some point, just because he's one of the fastest players in the state of Georgia in the 2024 class. So, interested to see if he comes in special teams or wide receiver room. He played both corner and wide receiver in high school, but is going to start his career in Atlanta as a wide receiver as well. Again, they do involve the tight end as well in this offense. I think that's a room that certainly has an opportunity to take over some of those targets as well. But no, I definitely see the wide receiver, receptions and targets up for grabs at this point.
Well, you talked about those tight ends and Chaney's new offense. How do you expect those tight ends to be utilized? And then how much of a role do you think they're going to have in the passing game versus blocking game? Since you said that, they kind of want to run the ball. What do you see there?
Yeah, pretty comfortable, basically in inline blocking. They signed a former Georgia Tech commit, in Lane Waddle from the state of Indiana, came down and, enrolled early with the previous coaching staff. He has an opportunity to play right away. Amon Green's the guy that just really workhorse guy, doesn't get a ton of targets, but does everything he's asked to do, block in line, get out and make plays, when his numbers called. It's really been a threat down the seam in the previous offense. Certainly, the offensive staff being able to cut that tape on and see that he has the ability to run. He's a former dual threat quarterback in high school and gained, I think, almost 30 pounds since he's been in Atlanta, being the tight end. And just guy doesn't say a whole lot, just goes out there and does whatever is needed, and should get an opportunity to play as well. Waddle's kind of more the newer style tight end, being able to get out there and be the receiver out and open, being a big target, and him enrolling early has helped and getting him the opportunity that he should be able to to see some action as a young freshman. And again, the team that he was formerly committed to is the opponent week 1. So certainly a little bit of potential bad blood there. We'll see how that plays out.
And this tight end room looks pretty good in terms of guys returning back here in 2023. You mentioned Ahmad Green, Avion McBride, and Chris Bird. They all return here for 2024. How did that group look in the spring? And then you mentioned their Waddle.
Yeah, I mean that, and Bird, just to update on him. So he medically retired, so he's done there. But yeah, Waddle, Green, they're back. McBride is a really interesting prospect, just huge. I mean, 6'7", big body, big hands. Guy that just was former basketball player, has gained again a ton of weight, using the opportunity to get better, stronger. Been a really good target. Last year's a redshirt freshman, got on the field once Bird got hurt, and leveraged his opportunities. May not be a guy that's going to go and catch 35, 40 balls, but could see himself on the field quite often, especially in these 2 tight end sets, which I'm anticipating this Panthers offense to run.
Well, week 1, who do you see lining up at tight end in those two formations of that Green and Waddle?
That would be my guess at this point. Yeah, just depending on where we're looking. Yep, that would be my lean.
All right, well, let's talk about this O-line. The Panthers lose 4 of their 5 offensive linemen. Left guard Jonathan Brown, center Avery Reese, left tackle Travis Glover. They all graduate. Right tackle Montavious Cunningham is off to Virginia Tech, and that leaves right guard Trevor Timmons as the sole returning starter for this line. Depth-wise, they also lose some guys that played some meaningful snaps last year. Tayden Ferris and Ben Chukwuma both graduated. What has this new staff done to address those losses?
Yeah, they came in right away and only basically kept, I think the number was either 5 or 6 scholarship offensive linemen. So, just complete overhaul there. Went to the transfer portal really hard. Went out and just hammered guys. Going and get guys who were either JUCO ranks or transfers elsewhere, and just really looking for specific size. That's the overwhelming thing that you look up and down the roster, looking at, guys that don't have obviously a 2 deep published per se, but guys that will factor in left tackle, right tackle. Everyone's 300 pounds plus. You have enormous size up and down this offensive line. And I think that's going to be the overall sentiment of the folks that have come in, looking at guys like Will Larkins from Indiana, Malik McNeil, who started his career at Penn State, Joshua Black from Louisville, going and getting these guys from Power 4 programs to come in and kind of set that tone and really just improve the size and the strength of the Panthers offensive line. And I think that has been evident. Previous staff put a priority on quicker offensive line, guys that can get out and run, really get power, counter, things like that, get out in space and get on the offensive or get on the linebacker, get that second level. I think you're going to see a lot different offensive line this year, folks that really, are going to be able to mash people. And that's what the goal is so far with what he's recruited.
I did mention that Ben Chukwuma graduated, and you mentioned that the new roster just went out this last week. I didn't get a chance. Did he actually? Is he back this year? Did he have another?
Yeah, he's back. He's a former walk-on. So yeah, guy that played right tackle snaps last year, especially late in the year as well. And once Montavious Cunningham kind of jumped in the portal as he signed or committed to Virginia Tech. So he's been a rotational guy, and so he's a guy with some experience. Trevor Timmons, another guy, that had some experience there on the inside offensive line. If any NFL folks that are paying attention to this podcast, Lawrence Timmons is his uncle. So comes certainly from a football family there in South Carolina. Started his career in Charlotte. He's had snaps there. Alex Johnson is another guy, interior offensive line, that played some last year as well, playing center and in interior offensive line guard. So they have some experience back. Certainly a lot of snaps have exited, but just to get overall size, strength, they want to be able to overpower folks. And I think at last check they had the significant number basically of jumping offensive line over 300 pounds is pretty significant. And that's obviously a priority of this offensive line staff.
So with these guys coming in before the portal or before the spring and after the spring, are there any like position battles? I know you mentioned again at the beginning, you said every position's up for battle, but do you feel like this O-line's kind of settled into maybe a starting lineup that we know for week 1, or is there a particular position that you're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think all 5 positions on the line are open. I really do, because they're, knowing Coach McGee and wants to run the football, and that is a priority. I think this is going to be, you're going to have moving pieces. I'm sure the staff has an idea coming out of spring, and where guys are coming out in workouts. But I mean, you're not going to really know, I think, until week 1. I know he's not a huge fan of releasing a 2-deep either. So the 2-deep that may get published in before week 1's game probably may or may not be as accurate as it would be later on in the season. But I think that's a good thing. I mean, there's a lot of reps available, a lot of guys, as I mentioned, who have experience elsewhere, able to come in and compete right away for snaps. And but I think across the board, tackle, guard, center, every rep's open right now. And I think that's just the way Coach McGee wants it, just to have that fierce competition over the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Well, a lot of things are new here on the offensive side of the ball. If you have to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who's that going to be?
I'm going to say Talik Williams. I think he really has the opportunity to have not only running the ball, catching the ball, just cannot teach his speed. He was one of the speediest guys in the Sun Belt in previous years. I could see him, having the opportunity here and playing that slot wide receiver position for the Panthers and really, putting up pretty big numbers.
Well, as you might expect, when there's a new coach leading the way here for the Panthers, we've got a new defensive coordinator that gets added to the mix. We got Kevin Scherer. He comes into Georgia State from Georgia Tech, where he might know something about their week 1 opponent. He was the co-defensive coordinator there. What kind of style of defense can we expect to see here from Coach Scherer?
Yeah, I mean, he wants to run multiple fronts, 3-4, 4-3, wants to be able to kind of leverage that. Again, just as the offensive line increased in size, the defensive line increased in size as well. They really hammered the portal, going and getting 300-pound plus guys on the defensive line. Wants a ton of edge guys, outside linebacker rush ends as well. Significant amount of speed. Hit the JUCO ranks hard for that, trying to find guys that had tackles for loss, had guys that were productive in their previous stops. Got Bishop Thomas, former 4-star defensive lineman, signed with Florida State, then bounced out to Colorado. Is another guy that may have an opportunity. That he just kids like that of his size don't really come to the Sun Belt programs unless there's issues before, and his issues certainly have been documented. But that was the one thing that I think overall the staff did, is really try to leverage, find guys that had experience and production on the defensive side of things, in their previous stops, and done a really good job in kind of compiling that. I think there was probably 6 or 7 guys that had P4 experience, basically will be lining up on this defense. So that's certainly exciting to see if you're a fan of the Panthers. And I think for him, his year was a little strange last year, just because Brent Key, about midway through the season, demoted the previous defense coordinator, made him linebackers coach, elevated Shear from that. The defense did get better, but talent was an issue at Georgia Tech. It's one of the reasons why that defense was one of the worst in the country. They did improve. He wants to load up, stop the run, wants guys to fly around the defensive secondary. He said as much so far in spring, but ultimately, you got to see what personnel he has and who can play in what positions in order to do it. But I think you're going to see a multiple front. You're going to see attacking, linebacking play. You're going to see some defensive backs, be able to come up and pressure from that back third, and something he was able to do somewhat at Georgia Tech with some talent, but overall just the 11 just wasn't strong enough there. And I think for this level, certainly feels good about what he's rolling with to start fall camp.
Well, let's get to know a little bit of that personnel that Coach Scherer's defense is going to make up that Coach Scherer's defense. And let's start there with the defensive line. After the spring, they lost their sack leader in Javon Dennis to Memphis, plus they lost a few others in the portal in general. However, they bring back a good core group of guys in Henry Brandt III, Anthony Bloom, Fuchs Lewis II, and Corey Warren. How did the D line look in the spring?
Yeah, I mean they were, as you mentioned, it's going to be a brand new group. There's some names. I mean, Bryant's solid player, guy started his career at Louisville, kind of been that plug there, defensive tackle, nose guard. But you have a lot, a lot of guys have been added to that group as well. As I mentioned, Bishop Thomas a little earlier, Cam Williams on the outside, Victorian Brown from Louisville as well, guy that's from the Atlanta area. That just didn't play a ton there at Louisville, but again, 6'4", 250. They can play that defensive end edge spot. He was in spring as well, so I think you're going to see again a lot of guys rotate. That was the big thing that we kind of heard all through spring is just the need, want to improve the depth. That was a priority this offseason and going and getting guys. As we know, successful teams, high level teams, they want to be able to rotate 8, 9, 10 guys on the defensive line with regularity, not to burn out anybody, get anybody fatigued, and just be able to kind of pin their ears back and fire off on the quarterback.
Yeah, and like you said, they're bringing in a lot of depth. If I'm counting right, and who knows if I got all the transfers right, but I think there was like 7 guys that they brought in on that defensive line before the spring, after the spring, even Dorian Royal that kind of came in mid-spring. So, yeah, they bring in a lot of depth. So, obviously, you want the depth at the offensive and defensive line and keep people fresh and looking good there in the fourth quarter. Let's move over to the linebacking group. They lost their leading tackler from a year ago, Jontre Hunter. He's off to the NFL. They also lost Jordan. Is it Venziel?
Yep. He graduated.
Venziel. And then you got Shamar McCollum. They all graduated. However, they bring back a good core group, just like the defensive line from last year. You got Justin Abraham. He was their second leading tackler last year. You got Josiah Robinson, Kevin Swint. How did this group look in the spring?
Yeah, I mean, same deal there. I mean, you got some experience there. Swint's played a ton of football. Abe's played a ton of football. Guys that, are comfortable, go out there and basically any defensive alignment, they're going to go out there and fly around. I definitely think that, got faster this offseason as well. You mentioned Josiah Robinson. He's a guy that, kind of was a safety rover before and kind of plays that inside linebacker role. He can, slide around inside, outside. If you got, an odd front, even front, be able to move guys around, there as well. So it's really interesting. They went to West Georgia up the street and going Division II to get Xavier Robinson, another guy that kind of fits that inside linebacker guy that can run around and hit and really hit. Kept which was a little bit surprising, but 2 local Georgia kids in Brent Washington who just are missiles, and Jacoby Jones as well, guy from Forsyth, Georgia. So they do have more experience than some of the other position groups, but you're going to see a lot of new faces there as well. Guys that were brought in, Katie McDaniel brought in from UCF, going and getting guys in the transfer portal, really just to plug and play and jump in, again, right away and have the opportunity to play. I think you're going to see a lot of names that maybe folks didn't necessarily hear or didn't expect to hear in the spring. But again, reps up for grabs, as we mentioned. That's going to be probably the theme of the majority of fall camp.
You mentioned Xavier Robinson from West Georgia, and they brought in like a lot of other transfers. Do you see any of these transfers potentially making a huge impact, or are they more like depth pieces here in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately just, depends on how fall camp shakes out. But, you got guys that have played a ton, guys that are coming here for their last year. You always want to make an impact. You're not coming to sit on the bench your last year there. Another guy that's extremely interesting story is Daniel Humalia. Started his career at Arizona, another super highly ranked guy. He was productive at Arizona, but had some moments. But no, there's plenty of opportunities there. Look at Daniel potentially, but Swint's the guy that started his career at Clemson. He obviously was a representative there for Georgia State at the Sun Belt Media Days. Talked about basically wanting to end his career in a major way with tackles for loss, sacks. Again, I feel good about the linebacker room. Certainly not only moving forward, but what has basically been acquired.
The defensive backfield took two big hits. You got Brykese, right? Brykese Brown
Bryce
transfers.
Boston
Brykese
College.
goes over to Boston College, yeah, and you got Taki Leach. He graduated, but much like the linebacker room, and the secondary brings back a good group of guys like Jeremiah Johnson, Gavin Pringle, Isaiah Guy, Ronald Cooper, Cody Jones. There's a whole bunch of other guys. Like, this is a pretty good room. How did this look? How did the room look in the spring?
Yeah, to be same as before, same story, just different verse. There is talent, as you mentioned, guys that have played some significant snaps. Gavin Pringle is one of the best players in the Sun Belt last year. Super productive guy, come up from the FCS ranks. You add a guy like Kenyatta Watson as well that came from Georgia Tech, started his career at Texas. Big size. That's the one thing that I think this offseason has really come about from the defensive secondary. That kind of was another question mark ultimately, and got more solidified. Having guys, the safety position, corner position that can play. Jeremiah Johnson was a guy that was recruited as a corner, moved back to safety, super comfortable there. Isaiah Guy, as you mentioned, got an opportunity last year as a redshirt freshman. Played well in the bowl game as well. Have an opportunity to do it. So while some experience went out the door, there's certainly guys with some talent, longer defensive backs. That was a priority certainly of this offseason as well, getting guys that can get out and run in space and just really be able to defend all levels, in the Sun Belt. As we know, there's some talented playmakers in the Sun Belt. So that's an area that I think went from maybe a question mark or an area of potentially a weakness to could potentially be a strength, as the Panthers open up camp.
All right. Well, if you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season here in 2024, who are you picking?
Yeah, I like Kenyatta Watson. He didn't play a ton at Tech for whatever reason, and again, as I mentioned, started his career at Texas, playing for a hometown team. His dad was on the staff at Georgia Tech as well, so there was some question marks about why he wasn't playing. I think he's a day one starter here in Atlanta. Guy that's going to absolutely be able to put a stamp on this defense and being the guy, being able to play in that defensive back third and really a tone setter. I think, he's definitely a guy that I have circled that wants to line up against his former team. Several other former Georgia Tech guys are on this roster as well, and get some payback and some ups and knows what they're running over there on the offensive side of the ball as well, which is always valuable.
Well, with the fall camp coming up here next week, what position group or groups do you feel is the most concerning heading into camp?
I think most unproven, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, was probably wide receiver. I think you still have a lot of questions on the offensive line because you lost a ton of experience. Although there's talent and unproven talent. I think defensive line's pretty solid. Secondary solid, linebacker solid. I'd probably lean a little bit toward the wide receiver room at this point, just because you just have so many questions about guys that haven't really played significant reps, and they're going to be shoved into to play more reps than they probably ever played in their career.
Well, what would you say is the main strength of this team?
I think ultimately, the defense got significantly better on all three levels. I think the talent, top to bottom, from line, linebackers, and defensive backs, is significant. I think that's the one thing in the Sean Elliott era. You really didn't have a great defense. This was a defense that was bend, don't break. They were kind of run a 3-4 scheme that some offenses will be able to pick apart. I don't think those days, are here anymore in Atlanta. I think you have size all over the place. I think you have speed all over the place, and really, really guys that are going to get after the quarterback. This defensive team had playmakers, but as a unit, just were kind of leaky in key spots, and I think that will get buttoned up pretty quickly in the fall, and I think folks will be able to see that in September.
Well, now I kind of want to shift gears and talk about the NIL and McGee and what he's kind of meant for Georgia State. And I think there was a quote that either we were talking before or that it was from him. That's like, we're recruiting two places. It's the state of Georgia and the state of Atlanta. Like, not just the city of Atlanta, the whole, he referred to it as a state. Can you tell me what he has meant in terms of NIL and getting new players and the retention of existing players when he came in, how that's all impacted Georgia State?
Yeah, just prioritizes it. Really just change, complete sea change here, making NIL a priority. Georgia State only has one collective. It was relatively new, started in September. And to be candid, there just wasn't a culture of giving and fundraising, really. And Dell has basically said, look, this is how this program moves forward. We saw the previous coaching staff, win basically on average, being able to go to a bowl game about every year. But if this team and program wants to elevate and go and compete for a Sun Belt championship, ultimately that's where you're going to have to come and raise money and keep money in the program. I think at last check, they were right around $320,000 basically that have been raised since the beginning of the year. And I know there's significant and aggressive goals as well to try to get that number up closer to $500,000. For folks in the group of five, that's a tremendous amount of money just to be able to retain and recruit players and try to keep, high-level recruits as well in the state of Georgia, because these kids are getting offers from much bigger programs, Power 4 programs. And that goes back not only to the relationships that Dell and his staff have built with business owners, with folks here in the Metro Atlanta and Georgia area, but folks that want to see him succeed. And I think that's a big part of it as well. Being able to find those folks that maybe were disconnected or not necessarily attached to Georgia State in previous seasons. That's the one thing that I kind of remind folks all the time is this program has basically only existed since 2009. So you don't have a generation of fans. I have a 15-year-old in my house. The program's as old as she is. So you're not going to have generations or folks that they're knowing they're going to games and contributing. And honestly, the program started about bumpy, right? You went 6-5 in year one. You went through the FBS transition, not winning a whole lot. That completely crushed any momentum in terms of fan base. But Dell has really ignited that and said, listen, this is going to we're going to need certain things to be successful. We're going to need folks to show up. We're going to need folks to invigorate the city of Atlanta. And really, in a super crowded marketplace here in Metro Atlanta, being able to be, get a bigger megaphone, get over there, wave their hand and say, hey, we're here to make an impact and make a statement while, basically existing within the fabric of the city. So he's embraced the new Atlanta, kind of hashtag there on social media. His staff is full of guys up and down and all around that are familiar with Georgia and recruiting there. I know several members of his recruiting staff are former Metro Atlanta high school products as well. That's a huge priority of him as well, to be able to walk in to basically any school in the state of Georgia in Metro Atlanta and have a presence, have a face. And those high school coaches know and can trust them with the kids that they've got. And in the past, where they may have pushed them out of state and into bigger programs and things like that, Dell's winning those battles right now.
Well, it seems more and more like the demands of the head coach are really turning into more of this general manager role. You've got to recruit incoming freshmen. You've got to keep your own players almost like game by game, it seems like. Then there's the fundraising aspects and kind of moving away from the X's and O's. What trends have you seen there in the short time with Del McGee? I know we talked about the fundraising and stuff like that, but have you seen like the staffs increase, or what have you kind of seen there at Georgia State?
Yeah. He's more than doubled the staff, support staff as well. You mentioned general manager, reached out, got Hugh Jackson onto the staff as well. The NFL fame with Jackson State, Tennessee State, a couple of places, stops in the college ranks as well. So he brought him in to kind of get that side of things more organized, player personnel, building out that staff. The recruiting staff is more than doubled as well, putting the priority, making sure all, portions of his program are headed in the right direction. Everything's aligned, kind of moving where it's supposed to be. And as you mentioned, going and recruiting and kind of getting the tenor of your current staff, current players, current roster, see, what's going on there. That increase of staff, just support staff as well, to really know what's going on. It's a battle with every single coach, obviously, at any level. And some coaches are, kind of tapping out of that. They don't like it. They don't like folks coming out and trying to pillage their players. Dell understands that there's going to be some of that as well, and letting the kids know and being brutally honest with them. Look, if you go and you have an opportunity to a bigger program because you go and have a fantastic year, that's certainly your choice. We'll do everything we can to keep you. But if not, we're going to go and try to replace your spot with a as talented or more talented player as well. So he's trying to out-recruit every single class. And right now they have the number one class in the Sun Belt for the 2025 class. And I certainly don't see anything slowing down on that front.
Well, given all the changes in the coaching staff and player personnel, what does success look like for the Panthers here in 2024?
Yeah, I think ultimately the floor is a bowl game. I think that's looking at the schedule. I don't think that's completely out of reach. I think I've seen some Vegas books put in the over win total about 4.5, 5. I think that's a little low. The last few years have kind of been that same way. I mean, Sean Elliott won 7 games last year. They started out basically 5-1. Roared out. With a super favorable schedule. I think there's certainly an opportunity for wins in September. First week 1, obviously against Georgia Tech would be a massive upset, but candidly, one of the biggest games in the program history. Playing to downtown Atlanta team just for leverage that so many Atlanta kids up and down the roster there, so many ties, former Tech assistants. Georgia State's got former Georgia State assistants and Georgia State players on their roster as well. So that will be fun. Vanderbilt, if you're going to knock off an SEC team, certainly have an opportunity to do that at home in week 3. But I think a bowl game, certainly the Sun Belt East has turned over a lot. The Sun Belt is a meat grinder week in and week out. But I think from an opportunity to win, at minimum 6 games, I think it's definitely right there in front of it. And anything on top of that would be significant gravy on top of that as well for Dell to make his statement. And then again, just going and trying to attack the offseason and showing, hey, look, we want to be able to hit that next level, want to move forward and see what can happen. And I can tell you that this staff is not operating like a team that's got their head in the sand or looking to build for three or 4 years from now. They want to win now. They want to go out and try to compete and win the Sun Belt East.
Well, we've talked about everything from coaching changes to NIL to recruiting. Is there anything else that you want to share or think that we should know about this 2024 Georgia State Panther football team?
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. Downtown Atlanta, folks that have paid attention to Georgia State, it's always interesting too with the video game coming back out. They were a pick to click for a lot of folks going and wanting to play in the former Turner Field, home of the Atlanta Braves, and of course Olympic Stadium has been renovated there in downtown Atlanta. No, it should be a lot of fun. Glad it's clicking closer and closer. We'll be here a few short Saturdays But no, should be a fun year. And let you mention a lot of transition, but a lot of optimism certainly coming out of downtown Atlanta at this point.
Well, Ben, thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate you.
All right. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you for all your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.